A Karen tried to steal my kid's toy truck and accused them of stealing, all because they were black. Here's what happened. So, as a 37-year-old father who is black, I couldn't wait to see the look on my two young sons' faces when I surprised them with an RC toy monster truck for their birthday. My sons are 9 and 11, so it was a hot summer day and I thought it would be a great way to spend some quality time with my boys at the park near our home. We arrived at the park, unpacked the toy truck, and my kids immediately started playing with it, laughing and chasing each other around the playground with it. The park was crowded, but not too crowded. There were many people, but it seemed like everyone was enjoying their day. I sat on a nearby bench watching them have the time of their lives for about 20 minutes or so. But soon I decided to leave to a nearby corner store to buy some ice cream for them. It was a short walk. I thought I would be back before they even noticed I was gone. But as soon as I left, little did I know that my day was about to take a terrible turn. When I returned to the park, which was again fairly populated, I could hear loud screams and commotions coming from where my sons were playing. As I rushed over, I saw a white woman, who looked to be in her 30s, trying to take the toy truck away from my kids. She was insisting that they had stolen it and that it belonged to her. She was arguing and swearing with my boys, who were crying and pleading with her to give it back. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I immediately intervened and demanded that she return the truck to my sons. She looked at me with a mixture of shock and contempt and said, "You know they stole this, right? It belongs to my nephew." I could feel the anger rising within me, but I tried to remain calm and composed. I explained to her that it was a birthday present for my kids and that they had every right to play with it. But this woman, who I will now refer to as Karen, refused to listen and continued to accuse my children of stealing. She even had the nerve to suggest that they were only playing with the toy truck because they were black and couldn't afford their own. I was so angry and couldn't believe the audacity of this woman to make such a racist assumption about my kids and I. "Are you kidding me? You think because we're black we can't afford a damn toy truck?" I shouted. "You're just making up lies. Give my kids the truck back." Karen tried to backtrack and say, No, that's not what I meant," but the damage was done. She was still insisting that it was hers. By this time, the scene had attracted the attention of other people in the park, but instead of helping, they just stood there watching. "Ma'am, please just give it back. It's a birthday present for my kids," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I'm not giving it back. It's mine," she replied, her voice filled with anger and determination. "You're just being ridiculous." "Shut up and give it back," I said, my voice filled with frustration. I could see my boys were getting more and more distressed by the situation. Their tears were now streaming down their faces and they were clinging to me. I didn't want to escalate the situation anymore and I made a quick decision. I snatched the truck back and walked away with my kids. My kids were still crying and asking me why that lady did that to them. My heart was heavy with sadness and anger. As we walked away, Karen continued to shout and make racist remarks such as, "Those black kids don't deserve to play with that truck. They probably steal everything they have." I couldn't even pay attention to her as I was more concerned about my kids. I walked away from the situation, trying my best to shield my children from her hate. We quickly left the park, shaken and upset by the entire encounter. Once we arrived back home, my kids were still upset and I did my best to comfort them and explain to them that not all people are like that and that it's not their fault. I debriefed the situation with them and explained that what had happened to them is an example of racism and hate. I also emphasized on the importance of standing up for themselves and not letting anyone treat them differently because of their skin color. The rest of the day was pretty much ruined, as my kids couldn't shake off the feeling of being accused of something they didn't do. It's just sad, shake my head. Looking back, I should have probably escalated the situation to teach Karen a lesson, but that's probably immature. Wow, this is just so insane. I can't believe that there are still people out there like this Karen who think they can just take things from other people because they think they're entitled to it. It's ridiculous how entitled some people can be. And to top it off, the fact that she was making racist assumptions about the OP and his kids is just so beyond the pale. It's just so disheartening to see. It sounds like you handled the situation well, especially with your children. It can be tough to explain racism to kids, but I think you handled it well by debriefing with them after. I also think you handled it well by not getting into a fight with that prick. Entitled parents, who are my bosses, demand me to work while my doctor tells me to be on bed rest, while I'm pregnant. They say their vacation is more important than my doctor's orders. Here's what happened. This happened 8 years ago when I was pregnant with my oldest child. The entitled parents in this story are mine. At the time, they were also my employers. My husband accepted his dream internship in another state between his junior and senior years of college, and didn't want to leave me alone with a complicated rainbow pregnancy. We had previously miscarried while temporarily staying with my parents the summer before. That's important later. I was about 5 months along when his internship started, and I had already had several ER trips and major complications due to HG. That's the kind of morning sickness that lasts all day, every day for the entire pregnancy, as in non-stop puking resulting in extreme weight loss and severe dehydration. There were times simply looking at a certain food or shifting my position in my seat caused me to throw up uncontrollably. If you know, you know. It sucks. For various reasons, me going with my husband wasn't an option, but I couldn't be left alone with my condition. After exploring several options, the only viable one was for me to move in with my parents during the summer until he finished the internship, which was also when my due date was. Then we would both move back to where the university was, about 5 hours from my parents, in order for him to finish his final year. Looking back, I still don't know why we ever thought it would be a good idea. At the time, I would describe my parents as overbearing and self-centered. But 8 years later, I can confidently say they are toxic narcs with undiagnosed personality disorders. Living with them was a nightmare, but it was only temporary, and I figured staying with someone who could help me get to my appointments or drive me to the ER was best for my baby. My parents owned a small construction company, and I had previously worked on and off in the front office doing administrative assistant work for several years. Everything from running payroll to filing reports with the state, picking up/delivering plans and materials, paying bills, sending bills, managing the schedules, keeping the books balanced, and keeping the entire office organized. All these tasks were combined into a single underpaid position that they could never seem to keep filled. Gee, I wonder why. It was how I made money during the summers and between semesters at college, but I hated it. I knew how to do all these things because when I was 16, I helped my parents as they started the company by themselves, and my dad was the only laborer. Whenever they were left short-handed, the manipulation and guilt would pull me back to help them temporarily until they could get someone competent and loyal to fill the position. When this story took place, the company had been running for nearly 8 years and had about 12 employees. Almost all of them laborers and somehow related to us, because relatives are the easiest to exploit in underpaid jobs, right? And they still only had one person doing all the office work. If they didn't have an employee filling that position, it would fall to my mom. And she never wanted to do any of this in the first place. The company was my dad's idea, so they wanted to keep her out of the office as much as possible. I could probably fill an entire subreddit with stories of how they exploited and stole from my family members and employees in this company. The timing of when I moved in with my parents happened to coincide with when one of their most recent assistants quit, and also when I had just found a medication that made my constant nausea manageable. They needed someone to fill the position, and I offered to help out for a couple of months so that they could find the right person and actually spend more than a couple of days training them before expecting them to be able to handle everything properly. The idea was that by the time I had my baby at the end of the summer, the permanent replacement would be fully trained and up to speed on everything. Also, I could make a little bonus money to help cover costs of having my first baby. So it seemed like a win-win, even if I hated the job. To make a long story short, my parents procrastinated finding a permanent employee to fill the position, making it impossible for me to take a step back from work as my pregnancy progressed. Additionally, at home, they treated me like a teenager. I was 24, and gave me a chore list and certain nights of the week I was expected to prepare dinner. They weren't charging me rent, so I figured I shouldn't complain. They also snapped at me for the amount of food I ate. I helped buy groceries. Also, I was pregnant and trying to recover from spending the last 5 months of not being able to keep food down. The worst was that they felt entitled to give me all the unsolicited parenting and pregnancy advice, including anti-vax and pseudoscience arguments, and my dad even demanded that I let him touch my stomach to feel the baby move. I was overstressed with being surrounded by my toxic parents at both work and at home, on top of trying to keep my baby healthy and missing my husband. I became horribly depressed and started having really bad PTSD from my miscarriage that happened almost exactly a year prior in that exact same place. Within 4 weeks of moving in with them, I started having preterm labor problems and was in a considerable amount of pain. I was instructed by my doctor to be on work rest and had to get progesterone shots regularly. But because my parents didn't have anyone else to run the office yet, they bullied me into continuing my work, but just doing it remotely from home. They made it clear that they still expected me to pull my weight at home with chores and meals, and that once my doctor cleared me to go back to work, that I was needed back in the office. I felt trapped because I had nowhere else to go, and the guilt was overwhelming because whenever they were home, they constantly talked about all the problems happening at work because I wasn't there to run the office. My health problems continued, and after 2 more weeks, they decided they had better actually advertise the position and start looking for a permanent replacement. All of this was leading up to a 10-day vacation to New York they had been planning for themselves. The week before they left for their vacation, my doctor told me I had to be on bed rest, and if my family wouldn't respect that, I would need to find a new place to live. He has been my doctor for years and understands all the details of the situation. So after my appointment, I called my dad to let him know that I was putting my foot down and refusing to work at all anymore at the office or at home, as per my doctor's orders. But when he answered the phone, he says, "OP, guess what? We went through all the applications from last week and found one we like. We interviewed her and she'll be starting on Friday. So we need you to prepare some instructional documents for her to reference for once you have the baby. and we need you to come in and train her during the next week while we are gone. When we get back from our vacation, you can be done working." He said all this like I should be excited that they didn't even post a position until 6 weeks after I started working, and that they were just now getting around to hiring someone. Like I should be glad I was finally getting to stop working almost a month after my doctor told me to stop. I took a deep breath and explained that I couldn't work anymore and that I couldn't come in and train her, that I was sorry, but I couldn't help them anymore. He got really agitated and started telling me I was putting them in an impossible situation because they need to go on their vacation and couldn't train the replacement, and he didn't understand why I couldn't just push through the next week until they got back. I suggested that when she came in on Friday, they train her themselves on the most basic things that need to be done, still catch their flight the next day as planned, and just put any tasks that needed absolute accuracy on hold until they returned. He answered that they couldn't possibly do any training on Friday because we need to pack for our vacation. We've been planning this trip for months, and if we had to train her, we won't be ready for it. Basically, I need to go in and do it. I'm frustrated at this point. I've been ordered to be on bed rest. To which he replies, "Well, what does that mean?" So I say, "Then I need to be in bed." And because he's such an understanding and caring father, he replies, "Okay, we can make that work. I'll put a cot in the office so you can lay down on it while you explain things and train her." And that was the last straw. I told him I would be spending the night at my sister-in-law's house and hung up on the phone. She had driven me to the doctor's office and was still with me, and when I told her what my dad said, she immediately offered to take me in and let me live with her until my husband finished his internship, knowing full well that it meant I would be having the baby while staying with her and that she and her family would be helping me care for a newborn. She's an angel, and I don't know how I would have survived this without her. My husband got permission to work remotely for the next week and drove back home that night and moved me into my sister's house. She and her family cared for me and actually let me be on bed rest. They set up a room for me and made everything as accommodating as possible and never asked for anything in return. I 100% believe the only reason my baby was born at a healthy gestation age is because of their care to bring my stress down and keep me well fed. My parents were furious and accused me of lying to them and stabbing them in the back. They went on social media and left comments about how hateful I am to those who have sacrificed the most for me and how horrible and selfish I am. On the day they came home from their vacation, yes, they still went. No, I don't know how they made it work. I was in the hospital with more complications and trying really hard not to have my baby early. The hospital is a couple of minutes from the airport, and my sister called my mom as soon as the flight landed to just let her know we were there, so that if something happened with me or the baby, they couldn't claim I maliciously withheld information as more reason to hate on me. But apparently my mom thought this was an invitation to care about me, and she immediately shut it down. She says, "Well, I'm sorry, but we've been gone for the last 10 days with an undertrained employee in the front office, and there are things I need to take care of that can't wait." And she hung up. When I actually did have my baby a few weeks later, they didn't come to the hospital because we had too much work at the office. You know, priorities. Needless to say, I've since cut them out of my life. Pregnancy is already tough as it is, but to have to deal with entitled parents on top of it, that's just cruel. Reading the OP's story, it's clear to me that they were put through an incredibly difficult and unfair situation. Being mistreated and taken advantage of by one's own parents during such a vulnerable time is truly heartbreaking. Also, I hate to say it, but they probably would have gaslighted you, say, if you did ignore the doctor's orders and you lost the baby, they probably would say, "Well, it's your fault that you didn't take the doctor's orders." They would probably blame you for it, even though they demanded that you serve them. However, they haven't tried to demand grandparents' rights. Anyways, if you like this video, you might like this video on the left, where Karen's CEO refuses to pay OP's salary, so he hacks and destroys her company. Yeah, this was kinda sweet.